I'll be the first to admit that I might have been a bit skeptical about this remake. Mostly because of EA's track record with screwing over Dead Space and the fact that Dead Space doesn't really need a remake. I still stand by that. But despite that, I still had faith in the actual developers of the remake. From the very beginning, they were completely open and upfront with the fans of the series about what they were doing and wanted to do. They did their developer streams to showcase new ideas and improvements they were implementing. From little ones to how sound was being handled to bigger concepts like the peeling system. They clearly wanted fans to know that they were putting thought and care into this remake, and thankfully it shows in the final product. This game is a prime example of what remakes should be, and I absolutely loved every second of it. Now, this should go without saying, but knowing the internet, I'm gonna say it anyway. Just because this game is good and different doesn't mean the original Dead Space just stops existing. People can still love the original while also loving this remake. Crazy concept, I know, but it's true. I love Dead Space so very much, and I recently did a video on just how good that game is. Yes, this is a plug for that video, but also it's important to know that the original game is absolutely amazing. The first game being as good as it is means that the developers of this remake already had a great groundwork to build upon. Honestly, if they just did a 1-for-1 of the original Dead Space just with better graphics and improved gameplay, then it already would have been pretty great. Much more pointless, but still, Dead Space is a classic, and that's because it's an inherently good game. It may have aged a bit since 2008, but it still holds up pretty well these days. Thankfully, EA Motive did more than just copy and paste the OG game with better graphics and a better engine. They improved the game in a ton of very noticeable and significant ways. This may be a bit controversial, but I do think this is a better version of the game in total, especially for people who've never played a Dead Space game before. This is Dead Space translated for the modern audience. Okay, I'll actually start talking about the game now, and what better place to start than the most obvious improvement, the graphics. This game looks scary good. Everyone involved in this should be so proud of themselves because they completely nailed the look and aesthetics of the Dead Space universe while also making everything look significantly better. They took every object and surface and room and area of Ishimura and rebuilt it from the ground up with way more detail. They did this while also making sure it all stayed true to the original design and did so masterfully. Every area you explore feels less empty and therefore the ship feels more authentic. While deciding how to redesign things, they made sure to keep in mind all the goals and ideas that played such an important role in the look of the first game. I'm not a graphics snob by any means, but this game looks phenomenal and I loved exploring Ishimura and revisiting every corner of the ship because it all felt so new. You almost don't even recognize some rooms because they just look so much better. The amount of detail present in every aspect of this game is insane. It's also not just the graphics that have been upgraded, but also the design of the ship itself is more streamlined than ever before. While still present, the tram system is no longer required for moving through the different areas of the ship. You can literally walk your way across the whole of the Ishimura without seeing a loading screen. Small areas have been added to connect all the areas we're already familiar with, and were done so with purpose. The ship has also been somewhat redesigned with this in mind. The layout of Ishimura is definitely different, but all the components are still present, just with slightly different arrangements and placements. All of these changes were made with practicality in mind. They help the layout of the ship make much more sense and feel more real. It is still very much the same Ishimura, with some slight to less slight changes made to fit this version of the game. None of the classic areas that you love are missing. They just might not be right where they used to be. Plus, there's the new security clearance thing that changes how you explore and unlock bonus areas and rooms. It even provides an in-game reason why you can access lockers later in the game that you couldn't earlier in the game. It's a pretty great addition and changes up how you explore the ship. I would be remiss to talk about a Dead Space game and not mention the sound design. As always, it is pretty much on point. A lot of that is due to the fact that they stayed very true to the original sound design with this remake. The music hits the same vibes and evokes the same reactions, you still get the voices whispering to Isaac throughout the game, and you still get the tension that comes with not knowing exactly where a sound is coming from and what's making it. In fact, I feel like they did a better job of adding in sounds off in the distance that make you question if it's just a ship creaking because it's old, or if it's a murderous zombie alien out for your ass. The Alive system also adds a ton of realism and tension by changing how Isaac reacts to different situations. If your health is low, then his breathing gets heavier and you can hear his heart beating from the stress. It goes way deeper than that and is way more complicated than that, but I'm not getting into it. It's a lot to explain. It's pretty cool, is my point, and it adds a lot to the more intense moments in the game. I could probably do without the heartbeat thing. I just found it to be distracting, honestly. It doesn't hurt the game, I just don't love it. Another thing I don't love, and this might honestly be my biggest complaint about the game, is the sounds of the Necromorphs. In the video I did on the original Dead Space, I mentioned how I love the sound design for the Necromorphs, and specifically mentioned the Exploder and the Guardians as standout examples. Unfortunately with this remake, I just feel like the noises from the Necromorphs, those two in particular, just don't hit the same, like at all. They are definitely worse, and it's most noticeable with the Exploder. They just didn't affect me in this game like they do in the other games, and I think the sound design is the reason why. It's just worse. They still suck because of the whole big exploding sack thing, but they don't send shivers down my spine when they show up. All the Necromorphs seem quieter, and all the screams and grunts and all that just aren't as effective as they used to be. At the end of the day, it's not a massive deal, but it still kind of sucks since that was such a cool part of the original game. Now, the sound design for the Necromorphs may be worse, but they have never looked better and felt more like a threat. I played this game on medium, and it felt much harder than the normal difficulty of the old game. Maybe I was just off my game, but the enemies seemed harder to kill. They took way more damage and felt more unstoppable. It also seemed like resources were harder to come by. Money was definitely more scarce. I struggled in this game more than I ever struggled in the original Dead Space, even on the harder difficulties. And that honestly made it more fun and scary. Each encounter with the Necromorphs felt more like a life or death situation, and that made each encounter more intense. The Necromorphs are also more terrifying than ever thanks to the massive graphical leap. They are way more disturbing to look at, and the peeling system that literally lets you blow chunks of flesh off their bones is gnarly in all the right ways. Additionally, it adds a bit to gameplay and incentivizes precise aiming. You'll get those limbs off a lot easier if you can strike the bone directly. The actual designs of the Necromorphs haven't really changed all that much, except for the Weezers, who are way more disturbing than before, but that's okay because they already looked terrifying. Everything I've ever said about how great the Necromorphs look and the gut-wrenching body horror they provide is still very true, if not even more so thanks to the whole game just looking significantly better. Plus, you can literally blow all the flesh from their bones and still have them coming at you as basically just a skeleton monster. It looks insanely cool and is insanely creepy. I love it so very much. The peeling system was a stroke of genius. I feel like they also built some of the weapon improvements with the peeling system in mind. Specifically the Force Gun, which is the weapon I just mentioned that is capable of blasting all of the flesh off enemies in one shot. In fact, most of the guns in the game have been modified to be more strategic, at least when it comes to their alt fires. The pulse rifle alt fire is now a proximity mine that explodes when enemies get too close. On top of that, it doubles as a grenade launcher when you just shoot the mine directly at enemies. This is a massive improvement over the weird over the head shooting in a circle thing that it used to do. Pretty much every weapon in the game now has a new alt fire that changes how they can be used in fights, except for the plasma cutter, which was already perfect. The flamethrower, for example, can create a wall of fire to keep enemies away, and that can be incredibly useful. I don't really have any problem with the new alts, and I think they did a great job fixing them. What's more is you don't have to buy the guns anymore. In more typical survival horror fashion, you find and unlock the guns as you make your way through the game. This helps space them out more and gives you more time to use them before deciding which ones you prefer. It's neat and I like it. Overall, the gameplay is just better than it used to be. They even fixed the ADS section by completely reworking it. The boss fights are also much better than before, which is great because that was one of my biggest complaints with the original game. I also love the fact that you can change the controls to match Dead Space 2's button layout, because that was always my favorite. They also brought in the Impalement Mechanic from Dead Space 2, where you can use kinesis to launch long sharp objects at enemies to take them out, including their own limbs and blades. It doesn't feel as overpowered in this game as it did in Dead Space 2, but honestly I think that's kind of a good thing. You can't strictly rely on that to instantly kill them. They also added more objects into the game that can be launched, like pipes and fan blades. This is something you could technically do in the original game, but it's much more effective this time around. Unfortunately, kinesis is clunkier than it is in Dead Space 2. It can be very inconsistent when trying to grab specific objects, and it can be annoying at times. So many times I was just trying to grab an enemy's claw to throw at another enemy, and it would grab the whole corpse when all I wanted was the stabby bit. Maybe they could fix it with a patch or something, but even if they don't, it's more annoying than game ruining. Furthermore, there are some completely new elements of gameplay, like the circuit breakers, which let you reroute power to different things like doors or lights. I found this to be a really creative addition to the game. There are several instances where you're forced to choose how you rewrite the power and what consequences that creates. For example, you may have to take the power away from the lights or life support in order to get where you need to go, so it's up to you which you would rather lose. The choice is to continue in complete darkness, but be able to breathe fine, or keep the lights on, but now run the risk of suffocating. It's brilliant and does a lot to boost the horror of the game. Speaking of horror, this game is definitely terrifying. As a longtime fan of Dead Space that has played the original game dozens of times, I had a great time with this game in that regard. I haven't been this freaked out by a Dead Space game since I played Dead Space 1 as a literal child. Despite how familiar the whole game is, you never know what has changed, and that meant I never truly knew what to expect, which was very exciting for me. In fact, that could be said about the game as a whole. The game felt familiar enough while simultaneously being a whole new beast. All the new elements and changes eventually add up to make this feel like a brand new experience. Developers did a fantastic job of achieving this while still honoring and adhering to the core of the original game. This isn't just Dead Space remade, it's Dead Space reborn. I personally think this is what makes a remake great. It gives you an experience that is familiar and nostalgic while at the same time giving you something completely new. With that in mind, I think this game is basically a perfect remake and sets an example that should be followed in the future. Especially if we're going to keep getting remakes for games that don't necessarily need them. Developers shouldn't be afraid to try new things and innovate where they can. That's what makes for better games. EA Motive accomplished that here, and the result is a fantastic game that honors and respects its original source material, but still manages to make a name for itself too. Even the changes to the story don't feel forced or illogical. Nothing they changed or added felt frivolous or pointless. They expanded and added to the existing story, and improved the overarching story by doing so. Just the fact that Isaac can actually speak this time around is enough to make it fresh and new, but Motive didn't stop there. There are now little extra side quests you can do that are pretty simple and straightforward, but add some depth to certain story aspects and characters that were kind of neglected in the first game. Plus, some of this new stuff helps the game fit better in the larger story of the Dead Space universe. Less of the big plot points are hidden behind audio and text logs this time around. I won't get into details because whether you're a new player picking up their first Dead Space game or a longtime fan of the series, you should experience it for yourself. I quite like the changes and additions they made to the story, and I personally think it's the definitive way to see the story play out. As far as I'm concerned, they didn't ruin any of the characters or their arcs. In fact, all the characters seem to be more developed this time around, especially Nicole. Some of the faces might be a bit weird, but the actual characterization has been improved, so I'm okay with it. It just feels like a more complete and fulfilling story in total, and as a big fan of the series, it was great to be a part of that. Look, at the end of the day, I love this game. It's fantastic and sets a high bar for remakes in the future. I'm just so impressed by how they managed to give me something so nostalgic that was also something completely new. I would genuinely love to see what they could do with Dead Space 2, and that's saying something. I'm way more protective of that game than Dead Space 1, but I definitely wouldn't mind seeing a remake if they can put this level of care into it as well. Overall, I do think this is definitively the best way to play Dead Space. It's more modern and more accessible and probably more new player friendly. That being said, however, don't skip the original Dead Space if you haven't played it yet. This remake is great, but a large part of that is due to how overwhelmingly good the original game is. If you haven't played the original Dead Space, then you still should, even if you've already played this. They are different enough that I for sure think it's worth experiencing them both, even just to see how much they did change in this remake. I also hope this game does well because I just want to see more Dead Space, period. That's all I've wanted since EA killed the franchise in the first place. Now I wouldn't put it past EA to f this up too, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. Anyways, thanks for watching this review type thing. Hope you enjoyed this video and found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of this game. I'm very curious to see how people feel about it. Seems like most of the response has been positive, but still. Don't forget to corpse stomp that subscribe button, and I'll see you in whatever I do next.